The rain hammered down like bullets from heaven, and Eleanor Jane was already soaked to the bone when she realized the patch on her roof had torn clean off in the wind. She stood on the narrow edge of her porch roof, her boots slipping against the wet shingles as she fought to nail down a piece of canvas that whipped and snapped like an angry snake in her hands. The year was 1878, and in Beaver, Utah, spring storms could be just as dangerous as winter blizzards, catching folks off guard when they least expected trouble. Eleanor had been living alone in the small homestead for 8 months now, ever since her father had passed from pneumonia the previous autumn. At 23 years old, she had inherited the land, the cabin, and all the responsibilities that came with it. She had also inherited her father's stubbornness, which was why she was up on this roof in the middle of a thunderstorm instead of waiting for calmer weather like any sensible person would. The wind shifted suddenly, nearly knocking her sideways, and she grabbed for the chimney to steady herself. Rain streamed down her face, blinding her as she tried to position another nail between her lips. The canvas flapped violently, threatening to sail away into the dark afternoon sky. Thunder rolled across the valley so loud it seemed to shake the very bones of the earth. That was when she heard the voice, deep and urgent, cutting through the storm. "Madam, what in God's name are you doing up there?" Eleanor turned, nearly losing her footing again, and saw a man on horseback at the edge of her property. Even through the sheets of rain, she could make out his broad shoulders and the dark hat pulled low over his face. He was already dismounting, tying his horse to her fence post with quick, efficient movements. "Fixing my roof," she shouted back, stubbornness flaring hot in her chest despite the cold rain. "What does it look like?" "It looks like you're about to break your neck." The man was striding toward her house now, his long coat flapping behind him. "Get down from there before you get yourself killed." "I can manage just fine," Eleanor called back, even as another gust of wind proved her a liar by ripping the canvas completely from her grip. She watched in dismay as it sailed away across the valley, disappearing into the gray curtain of rain. She heard the man curse, and then he was at the base of her house, already finding handholds in the rough timber. Within seconds, he had pulled himself up onto the lower roof, then scrambled up to where she stood. "You are the most stubborn woman I have ever laid eyes on," he said, his voice closer now. She could see his face properly for the first time, strong-jawed and weathered, with eyes the color of storm clouds. He looked to be in his late 20s, maybe 30 at most, with several days' worth of stubble darkening his jaw. "Do you have more canvas?" "In the barn," Eleanor admitted, having to shout over another crack of thunder, "but I can get it myself." "The hell you will!" He was already assessing the damage to her roof, his practiced gaze taking in the torn shingles and the gap that was letting rain pour directly into her home. "I am Garrett Vance, and I'm not about to stand by and watch a woman risk her life when I have 2 good hands and know how to use them. Now get down and fetch that canvas and bring whatever nails and tools you have. We will fix this together, and we will do it right." There was something in his tone, not unkind but absolutely certain, that made Eleanor bite back her automatic refusal. She nodded once, then carefully made her way back to the edge of the roof. Garrett moved beside her, offering his hand to steady her descent. His grip was strong and warm despite the cold rain, and Eleanor felt an unexpected flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with fear of falling. She dropped down onto the porch and ran through the mud to the barn, her skirts heavy with water and clinging to her legs. Inside the relative shelter of the old structure, she grabbed a rolled piece of oiled canvas her father had saved for emergencies, along with his tool belt and a box of nails. Her hands were shaking, though whether from cold or from the intensity in Garrett Vance's gray eyes, she could not quite say. When she emerged back into the storm, Garrett had already torn away the damaged shingles, exposing the bare roof boards beneath. He reached down to take the supplies from her, then to her surprise, extended his hand again. "Come on up," he said. "You started this job, and I reckon you will want to see it finished properly." Eleanor hesitated only a moment before taking his hand and letting him help pull her back onto the roof. They worked side by side in the driving rain, Garrett directing her to hold the canvas in place while he secured it with swift, sure hammer strikes. He had to lean close to make himself heard over the storm, and Eleanor found herself acutely aware of his presence, the solid warmth of him despite the cold, the competent way his hands moved, the concentration on his face. They layered shingles over the canvas, creating a barrier that would hold against the weather. Rain ran in rivers down their faces and hands, but Garrett never faltered, never suggested they stop and wait. He worked with the focused intensity of a man who had faced far worse than a spring storm, and Eleanor matched him stroke for stroke, holding boards in place, passing nails, doing whatever he needed. It took nearly an hour before Garrett finally sat back on his heels and nodded. "That will hold," he said. "Not pretty, but it will keep the rain out until you can do a proper job in dry weather." Eleanor looked at their handiwork, at the patchwork of canvas and shingles that now covered the gap in her roof, and felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude mixed with something else, something warmer and more complicated. "Thank you," she said, meeting his eyes. "I do not know what I would have done if you had not come along." Garrett's expression softened slightly. "You would have managed somehow, I expect. You seem like the type who does not know how to quit, but there is no shame in accepting help when it is offered, miss." "Jane," Eleanor said. "Eleanor Jane, though most folks just call me Eleanor." "Miss Eleanor?" Garrett touched the brim of his soaked hat in a gesture that was somehow courtly, despite their bedraggled state. "We should get down before lightning decides to make things interesting." They climbed down together, and Eleanor led him onto the porch where they were at least partly sheltered from the worst of the rain. Now that the crisis had passed, she became suddenly aware of how improper this was, being alone with a strange man, both of them soaked through to the skin. But propriety seemed like a distant concern compared to the genuine gratitude she felt. "Please, come inside and warm yourself," she said. "It is the least I can offer after what you did." Garrett hesitated, clearly aware of the same propriety issues she was wrestling with. "I do not want to compromise your reputation, Miss Eleanor." "My reputation will survive a neighbor sharing my hearth to dry off after helping me in a storm," Eleanor said firmly. "Besides, anyone who would think ill of that is not worth worrying about. Come in, please. You will catch your death standing out here." She pushed open the door, and they stepped into the small main room of her cabin. It was simply furnished but clean, with a stone fireplace on one wall and a small kitchen area on the other. Rain had come in through the damaged roof before they patched it, leaving a puddle in one corner, but the drip had stopped now. Eleanor quickly stirred up the fire in the hearth, adding fresh wood until flames leapt and crackled. She pulled out 2 blankets from a trunk and offered one to Garrett. "I will make coffee," she said, "and I have some stew left from yesterday. You must be hungry." "I would not want to take your food," Garrett said, but his eyes lingered on the pot that still hung on its hook near the fireplace. "You will take it and be grateful," Eleanor said with a small smile. "After climbing up on my roof in a thunderstorm, you have earned a meal at the very least." As she busied herself reheating the stew and making coffee, she was acutely aware of Garrett's presence in her small home. He had removed his coat and hat, hanging them near the fire to dry, and she could see him properly now. He was tall and lean, with the kind of wiry strength that came from years of hard work. His dark hair was plastered to his head from the rain, and there was an old scar along his left cheekbone that gave his face a rugged character. "What brings you through Beaver in such weather?" Eleanor asked as she ladled stew into bowls. "Most travelers would have sought shelter before the storm hit." "I was not traveling through," Garrett said. "I just arrived yesterday. I've taken a job as foreman at the Dawson Ranch, about 5 miles east of here. I was riding the property lines, getting familiar with the land when the storm came up. I saw your place and thought to wait it out in your barn if you would not mind. But then I saw you up on that roof and—" He shook his head. I could not believe my eyes. Eleanor felt heat rise to her cheeks that had nothing to do with the fire. I suppose it was foolish, but I was afraid the whole roof would go if I waited, and I cannot afford to rebuild the entire thing. "It was brave," Garrett said quietly. "Foolish, maybe, but brave. This is your father's place?" "It was." Eleanor handed him a bowl of stew and a spoon. "He passed last autumn. It is mine now. for whatever that is worth. Garrett's expression grew sympathetic. I am sorry for your loss. It must be hard managing a place like this alone. I am managing, Eleanor said, perhaps too quickly. The truth was that it was harder than she had ever imagined, but admitting that felt like admitting defeat. She poured coffee into 2 tin cups and settled into the chair across from him. What about you? What brings a man to Beaver, Utah to work as a ranch foreman? Garrett took a long drink of coffee before answering. I have been working ranches since I was 16 years old, moving from place to place wherever the work took me. I have worked in Texas, Colorado, Wyoming, and half a dozen other territories. When I heard the Dawson place was looking for a foreman, I figured it was time to settle somewhere, put down some roots. I am tired of drifting. There was something in his voice, a weariness that went deeper than physical exhaustion that resonated with Eleanor. She understood that feeling, the desire for something solid and permanent, something that could not be swept away by circumstance or misfortune. They ate in companionable silence for a while, the storm continuing to rage outside. The fire crackled and popped, filling the cabin with warmth and the pleasant smell of burning pine. Eleanor found herself stealing glances at Garrett, at the way the firelight played across his features, at the careful, deliberate way he ate, as though he had learned long ago not to waste anything. This is good stew, he said eventually. You are a fine cook. My mother taught me before she died, Eleanor said. That was 15 years ago, so I've had plenty of practice. Cooking for one is different than cooking for a family, though. I always make too much. I will not complain about that, Garrett said with a slight smile, and Eleanor felt that flutter in her chest again. They talked as the afternoon wore on, and the storm gradually lessened to a steady rain. Garrett told her about his years working ranches, about sleeping under the stars and driving cattle across vast stretches of wild country. Eleanor told him about growing up in Beaver, about her mother's death, and her father's determination to make a success of their small homestead. She found herself sharing things she had not told anyone, thoughts and feelings she had kept locked inside during the long, lonely months since her father had died. Garrett listened with a focus that made her feel heard in a way she had not experienced in a long time. He did not interrupt or try to offer solutions to problems she was not asking him to solve. He simply listened, nodded, and sometimes asked a question that showed he truly understood what she was saying. By the time the rain stopped completely, the sun was setting, painting the clouds in shades of pink and gold. Garrett stood and stretched, then gathered his now mostly dry coat and hat. I should head back to the ranch, Mom, he said, but I will come by in a few days and check on that roof. Make sure the patch is holding. If you need any other repairs done, I would be happy to help. Eleanor walked him to the door, reluctant for the evening to end, but knowing it must. Thank you again, Garrett. I truly do not know how to repay you. No payment necessary, Garrett said. He paused in the doorway, his gray eyes meeting hers. But I would like to call on you again, if you would permit it. Not for repairs, just to call. Eleanor felt warmth spread through her chest. I would like that very much. Garrett smiled then, a real smile that transformed his serious face and made him look younger. Good. I will see you soon, Miss Eleanor. She watched from the porch as he mounted his horse and rode away into the twilight, and she knew with absolute certainty that something important had just begun. Over the next several weeks, Garrett became a regular presence in Eleanor's life. He came by on Sunday afternoons, his one day off from the ranch, and they would sit on her porch and talk for hours. Sometimes he brought small gifts, a sack of flour from town, a book he thought she might enjoy. Wildflowers he had picked on the ride over. Sometimes he helped with chores around her property, fixing a loose board on her barn or reinforcing her fence where winter had weakened it. Eleanor found herself looking forward to Sundays with an intensity that sometimes frightened her. She would plan what to cook, what to wear, what topics of conversation she wanted to explore with him. She learned that he had grown up in Missouri, that his parents had died in a cholera outbreak when he was young, that he had an older brother he had not seen in 10 years. She learned that he loved the open country and hated cities, that he could play the harmonica but could not carry a tune singing, that he had a dry sense of humor that caught her off guard and made her laugh in ways she had not laughed in years. And she learned that she was falling in love with him. It happened gradually, like the slow turning of seasons, but once she acknowledged it, Eleanor could not imagine how she had ever felt differently. She loved the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled. She loved his quiet competence, the way he approached problems with calm determination. She loved his gentleness with animals and the respect he showed her, never assuming he knew better just because he was a man. She hoped that he might feel the same way. There were moments when she would catch him looking at her with an expression that made her breath catch, moments when their hands would brush and neither would pull away, moments when the air between them seemed to vibrate with unspoken possibility. But Garrett never spoke of his feelings, and Eleanor, for all her courage in other matters, found herself unable to broach the subject first. Then came a Sunday in early June when Garrett arrived with a basket and a proposition. "The Dawsons are throwing a barn dance on Saturday next," he said. "The whole valley is invited. Would you do me the honor of accompanying me?" Eleanor felt her heart leap. A barn dance was not just a social occasion, it was a public declaration of courtship. Everyone in the valley would see them together, would know that Garrett Vance was courting Eleanor Jane. "Yes," she said, not even trying to hide her smile. "I would be honored." Garrett's answering smile was brilliant. "Good. That is very good." The week leading up to the dance passed in a blur of preparation. Eleanor took her best dress, a deep green cotton that had been her mother's, and altered it to fit her better, adding new lace at the collar and cuffs. She washed her hair with lavender soap and spent an evening pressing the dress until every wrinkle was gone. Saturday evening arrived clear and warm, the kind of perfect June night that seemed made for celebration. Garrett came to collect her in a borrowed wagon, looking handsome in a clean white shirt and dark vest. His eyes widened when he saw her, and he was silent for a long moment before speaking. "You look beautiful," he said simply, and the sincerity in his voice made Eleanor's cheeks flush with pleasure. The ride to the Dawson Ranch was pleasant, the setting sun painting the valley in shades of orange and gold. They talked easily, as they always did, but there was a new undercurrent of excitement, of anticipation for what the evening might bring. The barn at the Dawson Ranch had been swept clean and decorated with wildflowers and bunting. Lanterns hung from the rafters, casting a warm glow over the gathering crowd. A small group of musicians was setting up in one corner, tuning fiddles and testing the piano that had been hauled in for the occasion. Long tables lined one wall, laden with food that the women of the valley had brought to share. Eleanor recognized many faces in the crowd. There was Martha Hensley, the school teacher, talking with the blacksmith Samuel Porter and his wife. There was old Tom Brennan, who ran the general store, and the Yates family, who had homesteaded land near the creek. People nodded and smiled as she entered with Garrett, and Eleanor saw more than a few knowing looks exchanged. "Let them talk," Garrett murmured in her ear, as if reading her thoughts. "I am proud to be here with you." The dancing started soon after, with the fiddler striking up a lively reel. Garrett led Eleanor onto the floor, and she discovered that he was a better dancer than he had let on. He guided her through the steps with confidence, his hand warm and steady at her waist, his eyes never leaving her face. They danced 3 dances in a row before stopping to catch their breath and get some punch. Other men asked Eleanor to dance, which was proper and expected, but she found herself constantly aware of where Garrett was, watching for his return. When he came to claim her for another dance, something slower this time, she went into his arms gladly. "I have been thinking," Garrett said as they swayed to the music, "about the future." Eleanor's heart began to pound. "Oh?" "I have saved most of my wages these past few years, where," Garrett continued, "I have enough to buy some land of my own, start a small ranch, not anything grand, but enough to make a living, to build a life." He paused, and Eleanor waited, barely breathing. "The thing is," Garrett said, his voice dropping lower, "I do not want to build that life alone. These past weeks, getting to know you, spending time with you. They have been the happiest I can remember. You are strong and capable and brave, and when I think about the future, all I can see is you." They had stopped moving, standing still in the middle of the dance floor while other couples swirled around them. Eleanor looked up into Garrett's gray eyes and saw everything she had been hoping to see there. All the feelings she had been afraid to name reflected back at her. "Eleanor Jane," Garrett said, "I know this is fast, maybe too fast, but I cannot hold it in any longer. I love you. I think I have loved you since the moment I saw you up on that roof in the rain. Too stubborn to quit even when any sensible person would have. Will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life making you happy?" Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes, but they were tears of joy. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "Yes, Garrett, I will marry you. I love you too so much." Garrett's face broke into a smile so wide and genuine that it transformed him. He pulled her close, right there in the middle of the dance floor, and kissed her. It was Eleanor's first kiss, and it was everything she had ever imagined, sweet and tender and full of promise. Around them, the music faltered as people noticed, and then there was applause and cheering and laughter. They broke apart, both laughing, and Garrett took her hand and held it high. "She said yes," he announced to the crowd, and the cheering grew louder. The rest of the evening passed in a happy blur. People came to congratulate them, to shake Garrett's hand and hug Eleanor. Martha Hensley cried happy tears and promised to help with the wedding preparations. Old Tom Brennan offered to give Eleanor away, since she had no father to do it. The Yates family insisted on hosting the wedding breakfast at their place. Through it all, Garrett stayed by Eleanor's side, his hand finding hers again and again, his eyes full of love and happiness. They were married 3 weeks later in the small church in Beaver, with what seemed like the entire valley in attendance. Eleanor wore a new dress of cream-colored silk that Martha and several other women had helped her sew, with orange blossoms in her hair. Garrett wore a new suit, and when he turned to see her walking down the aisle on Tom Brennan's arm, his eyes grew bright with unshed tears. The ceremony was simple, but beautiful. The preacher spoke about love and commitment, about two people joining their lives together in partnership and respect. When Garrett slipped the simple gold band onto Eleanor's finger and promised to love and cherish her for the rest of his days, Eleanor felt as though her heart might burst with happiness. They spent their wedding night in Eleanor's cabin, which would be their home until they could build something larger. Garrett was gentle and patient, mindful that this was all new to Eleanor. They explored each other with wonder and growing passion. And when Eleanor finally fell asleep in her husband's arms, she felt more complete than she had ever felt in her life. The weeks that followed were a period of adjustment and joy. Garrett continued working at the Dawson Ranch, but he spent every evening and all day Sunday at home with Eleanor. They worked together on the homestead, expanding the garden, repairing the barn, talking about their plans for the future. Garrett had found a parcel of land for sale about a mile from Eleanor's property. Good grazing land with a small creek running through it. They began saving every penny they could spare, planning for the day when they could buy it and start their own ranch. In the meantime, they were happy in the small cabin, learning to navigate the rhythms of married life. Eleanor discovered that Garrett snored softly when he slept on his back, and that he always woke before dawn, moving quietly so as not to disturb her. Garrett learned that Eleanor sang to herself when she cooked, old songs her mother had taught her, and that she always checked the locks twice before bed, a habit formed from living alone. They had their first argument in August about whether to buy new chickens or save the money for the land. Eleanor thought the chickens would pay for themselves in eggs, while Garrett worried about having enough saved when the land went up for sale. The argument was brief and resolved with both of them apologizing and compromising, deciding to buy half as many chickens as Eleanor wanted and still put some money toward savings. "I do not want us to be the kind of couple who lets resentment build," Garrett said, as they sat on the porch afterward watching the sunset. "My parents never fought, but they also never really talked about things that bothered them, and I think that hurt them in the end. I want us to always be honest with each other, even when it is hard." "I want that too," Eleanor agreed, leaning into his side, though I hope we do not argue often. I do not like the feeling. Neither do I, Garrett said, pressing a kiss to her temple, but I love you enough to work through anything that comes our way. In September, Eleanor discovered she was pregnant. The realization came slowly, a missed monthly cycle, then morning nausea, then a gradual certainty that made her both terrified and elated. She told Garrett one evening as they were preparing for bed, suddenly shy about sharing something so momentous. Garrett's reaction was everything she could have hoped for. His eyes went wide with wonder, and then he was across the room gathering her into his arms, laughing and crying at the same time. "A baby," he kept saying. "We are going to have a baby." "Are you happy?" Eleanor asked, needing to hear him say it. "Happy does not even begin to cover it," Garrett said. "Eleanor, you have given me everything I never knew I wanted. A home, a wife, and now a child. I am the luckiest man in the world." The pregnancy progressed well. Eleanor continued working around the homestead, though Garrett fussed over her constantly, worried that she was doing too much. She assured him that women had been having babies while working farms for generations, but she also appreciated his concern. The way he took on extra chores without being asked, the gentle way he rested his hand on her growing belly when they lay in bed at night. In early October, the land Garrett had been watching came up for sale. They had saved nearly enough, but were still short by a significant amount. Eleanor was prepared to be disappointed, to wait and keep saving, but Garrett had other ideas. He went to the Dawsons and asked for an advance on his wages. The Dawsons, who had grown fond of their foreman and his capable wife, agreed readily. They also offered to help with the paperwork and to serve as character references should the bank require them. Within a week, the land was theirs. They stood on the property on a crisp autumn afternoon, looking out at the rolling grassland and the creek that sparkled in the sunlight, and planned where they would build their house, where they would put the barn and corrals, how many head of cattle they would start with. "We will call it the Vance Ranch," Garrett said, "and we will build something that lasts, something we can pass down to our children and their children after them." Eleanor squeezed his hand, her other hand resting on her belly where their first child grew. "It is perfect," she said. "It is everything I hoped for." Building the ranch became their focus over the winter months. With the baby due in late April or early May, they wanted to have at least the basic structures in place before Eleanor's time came. Garrett worked tirelessly, and when word spread through the valley about what they were doing, neighbors came to help. There was a barn raising in November with 20 men from the valley coming out to help frame the building in a single day. The women brought food and encouragement, and by the time the sun set, the barn stood strong and solid, ready to shelter livestock through the coming winter. Eleanor wept at the generosity and kindness, overwhelmed by the community support. "This is what makes a place home," Martha Hensley said, putting an arm around Eleanor's shoulders. "Not just the land or the buildings, but the people who care about you." The house went up more slowly, built by Garrett's hands with occasional help from neighbors. It was a simple 2-story structure with a wide front porch, a large kitchen, and 3 bedrooms upstairs. By March, it was finished enough to move into, though there was still trim work and finishing to be done. Eleanor walked through the empty rooms, her hands trailing over walls that still smelled of fresh-cut lumber, and imagined filling them with furniture, with curtains, with the life she and Garrett would build here. The nursery was upstairs, the room that got the best morning light, and Eleanor had already started sewing curtains and a quilt for the cradle Garrett was building in his spare time. They moved out of the old cabin in late March, loading their belongings into the wagon and making the short trip to the new house. It felt strange at first having so much space after the cozy confines of the cabin, but Eleanor quickly grew to love it. She set up her kitchen with care, arranging her mother's dishes on the new shelves Garrett had built, hanging herbs from the ceiling beams to dry. April arrived with its unpredictable weather, warm days giving way to chilly nights. Eleanor was huge with pregnancy now, moving slowly and tiring easily. Garrett had stopped working at the Dawson Ranch, wanting to be close to home when the baby came. They had bought a small herd of cattle, just 10 head to start, and Garrett spent his days tending them and finishing work on the ranch. The baby came on a warm afternoon in late April, arriving faster than anyone expected. Eleanor's labor started just after lunch, and by the time Martha Hensley arrived to help, having been fetched by a frantic Garrett, Eleanor was already well along. Martha sent Garrett out of the room, ignoring his protests, and helped Eleanor through the final intense hours of labor. When the baby's first cry filled the room, thin and reedy but strong, Eleanor felt a love so intense it was almost painful. Martha cleaned the baby quickly and placed the tiny bundle in Eleanor's arms. "A boy," Martha said, smiling. "A healthy, perfect boy." Eleanor looked down at her son, at his red, wrinkled face, and his tiny fingers that gripped her thumb with surprising strength, and felt tears stream down her face. When Garrett was finally allowed back in, he approached almost cautiously, his eyes wide with wonder and a little fear. "It is okay?" Eleanor said softly. "Come meet your son." Garrett sat carefully on the edge of the bed and looked down at the baby. His hand, so big and work-roughened, touched the soft fuzz of dark hair on the baby's head with infinite gentleness. "He is so small," Garrett whispered. "He will grow," Eleanor said, "and he will have the best father in the world to teach him." They named him Gabriel, after Garrett's father. Little Gabriel was a good baby, nursing well and sleeping in stretches long enough for Eleanor to rest and recover. Garrett was a devoted father from the start, getting up in the night to bring Gabriel to Eleanor for feeding, walking the floor with him when he fussed, singing off-key lullabies that somehow soothed the baby even if they made Eleanor laugh. The spring and summer passed in a blur of sleepless nights and overwhelming love. Eleanor watched Garrett with their son and fell in love with him all over again, seeing a tenderness in him she had only glimpsed before. The way he cradled Gabriel in his big hands, the way he talked to the baby as though he could understand every word, the fierce protectiveness that blazed in his eyes whenever he looked at his child. All of it made her heart swell with gratitude that this was her life, that these were her people. The ranch prospered modestly. Their small herd grew, and they sold several calves in the autumn for a good price. They put the money toward buying more land, another parcel adjacent to their first that gave them access to better water. Garrett hired a young man from town to help with the heavy work, and Eleanor managed the household and Gabriel, who was growing rapidly and starting to show his personality, which seemed to be a combination of his father's determination and his mother's stubbornness. By Gabriel's first birthday, Eleanor was pregnant again. This second pregnancy was harder than the first, with more sickness and fatigue, but Eleanor took it in stride. Garrett worried, but Eleanor assured him that every pregnancy was different and that she was fine. Their second child, a daughter they named Emma Rose, arrived in February during a cold snap that left ice crystals on the windows. She was smaller than Gabriel had been, more delicate, with wispy blonde hair that surprised both of them since they were both dark-haired. But she had her father's gray eyes, and from the first moment she had Garrett wrapped around her tiny finger. "I am in trouble," Garrett said, holding Emma while she slept in his arms. "I will never be able to say no to this one." "You could not say no to Gabriel either," Eleanor pointed out, watching her husband with their daughter and feeling her heart overflow with love. "That is different. He is a boy. He needs to be tough. But her?" Garrett looked down at Emma's sleeping face. "I am going to spoil her terribly." "Not too terribly, I hope," Eleanor said with a laugh. "We still have to raise her properly." Life settled into a new rhythm with 2 children. Gabriel was a toddler now, getting into everything, endlessly curious about the world around him. Emma was a quieter baby than her brother had been, more content to observe than to fuss. Eleanor's days were full, busier than she had ever imagined, but also richer and more satisfying. The ranch continued to grow. By their 5th anniversary, they had 40 head of cattle, 2 good horses, and a barn full of hay to last the winter. They had paid back their debt to the Dawsons and were turning a modest profit. Garrett had built a second barn and expanded the house, adding a proper parlor and a fourth bedroom upstairs. Eleanor had her vegetable garden and a small herb garden, and she had started keeping bees, producing honey that she sold in town along with eggs from their growing flock of chickens. She had also started teaching Gabriel his letters and numbers, wanting him to have the education she had been given. On a warm evening in June, they sat on their porch, watching the sunset while Gabriel played in the yard, and Emma toddled after him on unsteady legs. Eleanor leaned against Garrett's shoulder, feeling tired but content. "Do you remember the day we met?" she asked, "just when I was up on that roof in the storm?" "How could I forget?" Garrett said. "I thought you were the craziest woman I had ever seen." "You did not think that at all," Eleanor protested, laughing. "You thought I was brave." "I thought you were both," Garrett admitted. "Crazy and brave in equal measure, and I knew even then that you were someone special. I think I started falling in love with you that very day." "Just started?" Eleanor teased. "I thought it was love at first sight." "It was something at first sight," Garrett said. "But love, real love, that grew over time. It grew every time we talked, every time you smiled at me, every time I saw your strength and your kindness and your spirit. I loved you before I asked you to that dance, but I love you 100 times more now. 1,000 times." Eleanor turned to kiss him, long and sweet, grateful beyond words for the life they had built together. When they broke apart, Gabriel was staring at them with the serious expression he sometimes got. "Why are you kissing?" he asked. "Because I love your mother," Garrett said simply, "and someday when you are grown, you will find someone you love like that too." Gabriel considered this for a moment, then shrugged and went back to playing. Emma, who had fallen down in the grass, started to cry, and Eleanor went to pick her up, soothing her with practiced ease. The years continued to pass, marked by the changing seasons and the milestones of their children's lives. Gabriel grew tall and serious, more like his father every day, while Emma was spirited and adventurous, always testing boundaries and exploring new things. In 1885, Eleanor gave birth to their third child, another boy they named Samuel Jacob. He was the biggest of their babies and the loudest, with a personality that filled whatever room he was in. The ranch prospered beyond their initial dreams. They had over 100 head of cattle by 1887, and they had bought more land, expanding their holdings until the Vance Ranch was one of the more successful operations in the valley. Garrett had built a reputation as a fair employer and a smart rancher, and he had hired 3 full-time hands to help manage the work. Eleanor had established herself as well, becoming known for her honey and preserves, which she sold through Tom Brennan's store and at the market in town. She had also become one of the women that other women came to for advice, whether about child rearing or marriage or just life in general. She thought of it as passing on the kindness and wisdom that Martha Hensley and others had shown her when she was young and newly married. In the spring of 1889, tragedy struck the valley when a late blizzard caught several ranchers by surprise, killing livestock and damaging buildings. The Vance Ranch weathered it better than most, thanks to Garrett's preparations and good barns, but they lost some cattle and one of their horses. Worse, the Yates family, who had been so kind during Eleanor and Garrett's wedding, lost almost everything. Without hesitation, Eleanor and Garrett organized the valley to help. They donated cattle to help the Yates rebuild their herd, and Garrett led a group of men to repair the Yates' barn. Eleanor collected money and supplies from town, and she and the other women cooked meals and provided whatever comfort they could. "This is what you taught me," Garrett said one evening as they fell into bed exhausted after another long day of helping, "that a community takes care of its own, that we are all stronger together than we are alone." "You already knew that," Eleanor said. "You showed it to me that first day, when you climbed up on my roof without a second thought." "We helped each other that day," Garrett said, "and we have been helping each other ever since. That is what marriage is, what family is, what community is, all of us helping each other through the storms." By 1890, Gabriel was 9 years old and already helping seriously with ranch work. He could ride as well as most men and had a natural way with cattle that impressed even the experienced hands. Emma was 7, attending the school in town, and already showing signs of being a scholar like her mother. Samuel was 5 and into everything, a bundle of energy that kept Eleanor constantly on her toes. Eleanor was 35 now, Garrett approaching 40. They had both aged, of course, lines appearing at the corners of their eyes, threads of gray in their hair, but Garrett was still strong and capable, still the man who made Eleanor's heart flutter when he smiled at her. And Eleanor, Garrett often told her, had only grown more beautiful with time, the maturity in her face adding character and depth to her features. They had built something lasting, something good. The ranch was successful and stable. Their children were healthy and thriving, and their love had only deepened over the years. They had weathered storms both literal and figurative, and they had come through stronger for it. One Sunday afternoon in June, with the summer sun warm on their faces, Eleanor and Garrett rode out to the spot where they had first decided to build their house. The children were with Martha Hensley in town, giving them a rare afternoon alone. They sat on the grass overlooking the valley, watching their cattle graze in the distance. "Do you ever think about that day?" Eleanor asked, "the day we met?" "All the time," Garrett admitted. "I think about how easily I might have missed you. If the storm had come an hour later, if I had taken a different route, if I had decided to just wait it out in your barn instead of checking on the house. So many small moments that led to this." "I used to be afraid," Eleanor said quietly, "after my father died. I was so afraid of being alone, of losing the homestead, of not being strong enough to make it on my own. And then you came along, and suddenly I was not alone anymore. You gave me everything I needed, everything I did not even know I needed." "You gave me far more," Garrett said. "You gave me a home, a real home, for the first time since I was a child. You gave me a family, a place to belong. Before you, I was just drifting, moving from place to place with no real purpose. Now I wake up every morning knowing exactly why I am here and what I am working for. I have everything because I have you." Eleanor leaned into him, and they sat in comfortable silence, watching the play of light across the valley. This land, these cattle, the house they had built, the children they had raised, all of it was theirs, born from that first meeting in a storm, from two people who had helped each other when help was needed, and had found love in the process. As the years continued to roll by, the Vance Ranch became a landmark in the valley. Gabriel grew into a fine young man, taking on more and more responsibility until by the time he was 18, he was essentially running the day-to-day operations alongside his father. He had his father's seriousness and his mother's determination, and Garrett often said that the ranch would be in good hands when the time came to pass it on. Emma attended normal school in Salt Lake City, determined to become a teacher like Martha Hensley. She was brilliant and passionate, writing long letters home about her studies and her plans for the future. Eleanor was proud of her daughter's ambition, even though she missed her terribly when she was away at school. Samuel was shaping up to be the most adventurous of their children, talking constantly about exploring beyond Utah, about seeing the ocean and the big cities of the East. Garrett worried that Samuel would not want to stay on the ranch, but Eleanor reminded him that each of their children needed to find their own path just as they had found theirs. In 1895, Gabriel met a girl named Sarah, the daughter of a rancher from the next valley over. Eleanor saw her son fall in love the way she had fallen in love with Garrett, with a mixture of intensity and tenderness that made her heart ache with nostalgia. When Gabriel asked for his parents' blessing to marry Sarah, both Eleanor and Garrett gave it gladly. The wedding was held at the Vance Ranch in the summer of 1896 with what seemed like the entire territory in attendance. Eleanor watched her son pledge his life to Sarah and remembered her own wedding day, remembered the joy and hope and nervous excitement. Garrett squeezed her hand during the ceremony, and when she looked up at him, she saw tears in his eyes. "They are going to be happy," she whispered. "As happy as we are," Garrett whispered back. Gabriel and Sarah built a small house on the far side of the ranch property, starting their life together just as Eleanor and Garrett had started theirs. Within a year, they welcomed their first child, a boy named Thomas, making Eleanor and Garrett grandparents for the first time. Holding her grandson for the first time, Eleanor felt the strange weight of time, the realization that life was moving forward in ways she could not control. But it was a good feeling, a sense of continuity and hope. Thomas represented the future of the ranch, the next generation that would carry on what she and Garrett had built. Emma returned from Salt Lake City with her teaching certificate in 1898 and took a position at the school in Beaver. She boarded with Martha Hensley, who had finally retired, and threw herself into her work with passion and dedication. Eleanor could not have been prouder of her daughter, who was making her own mark on the world. Samuel, true to his restless nature, left home at 19 to work on the railroad, traveling across the country and sending back postcards from Denver, Chicago, and eventually New York. His letters were full of wonder and excitement, describing things he had seen and experienced that his parents could barely imagine. Eleanor missed him terribly, but was glad he was following his dreams. As the new century dawned in 1900, Eleanor and Garrett found themselves entering their middle years with grace and gratitude. They were 45 and 47 respectively, with grown children and a grandchild, with a successful ranch and a secure place in their community. They had lived through the end of the Wild West era, seeing the changes that came with increased settlement and civilization, with the arrival of more railroads and better roads, with the slow transformation of Utah from a frontier territory to something more established and permanent. But through all the changes, their love remained constant. They still sat on their porch in the evenings, watching the sunset and talking about their day. They still reached for each other in the night, finding comfort and passion in their familiar embrace. They still made each other laugh, still supported each other through difficulties, still chose each other every single day. On a warm afternoon in the spring of 1901, Eleanor was working in her garden when she heard a horse approaching. She looked up to see a rider she did not recognize, a young man who touched his hat politely as he stopped near her fence. "Excuse me, madam," he called. "Is this the Vance Ranch?" "It is," Eleanor said, standing and brushing dirt from her skirt. "What can I help you with?" "I am looking for work," the young man said. "I heard in town that the Vance Ranch is a good place to work, fair pay and fair treatment. I am a hard worker, and I know cattle and horses." Eleanor smiled, seeing in this young man an echo of Garrett 23 years earlier, a drifter looking for a place to belong. "My husband is in the north pasture," she said. "I will send my son Gabriel to fetch him. Why do not you water your horse at the trough and rest a bit? You look like you have come a long way." "From Colorado, madam," the young man said, "and thank you." As Eleanor went to find Gabriel, she thought about how life moved in cycles, how the ranch that she and Garrett had built from nothing was now stable enough to offer opportunities to others. She thought about the day Garrett had ridden onto her property, how her life had changed in that single moment, how everything good she now had stemmed from that chance encounter in a storm. That evening, after Garrett had hired the young man and settled him in the bunkhouse with the other hands, Eleanor and Garrett sat on their porch as they always did. The sun was setting in a blaze of orange and pink, painting the valley in glorious color. In the distance, they could see cattle grazing, see the barns and corrals they had built, see the evidence of all their years of hard work. "Do you ever regret it?" Eleanor asked suddenly. "Staying here, settling down instead of continuing to drift?" Garrett looked at her in surprise. "Regret it? Eleanor, how could I possibly regret the best decision I ever made? Marrying you, building this life with you, raising our children here. It has been everything I ever wanted and more than I ever dreamed possible." "I just wonder sometimes what you gave up," Eleanor said. "You had such wanderlust when we met, such a desire to see new places." "I gave up nothing," Garrett said firmly. "Or rather, I gave up a life of loneliness and aimlessness for a life of love and purpose. I would make that trade 1,000 times over. This life, with you, it is the greatest adventure I could ever have asked for." Eleanor smiled, reassured as always by his certainty, by the love that never wavered in his eyes when he looked at her. "I love you," she said simply. "I love you too," Garrett replied, "more than words can possibly express." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun disappeared below the horizon, and the first stars began to appear. Inside the house, they could hear Emma playing the piano they had bought for her birthday, a gentle melody that drifted out into the evening air. The sound of cattle lowing in the distance, the rustle of wind through grass, the creak of their porch swing, all of it was familiar and beloved. Gabriel and Sarah visited the next day with young Thomas, who was 3 now and full of energy and questions. They sat around Eleanor's kitchen table eating pie and talking about ranch business and family news. Sarah was pregnant again, glowing with the particular radiance of expectant motherhood. Gabriel was planning to expand their herd, and he wanted his father's advice on which bulls to purchase. Eleanor watched her family around the table and felt overwhelmed with gratitude. This was what she and Garrett had built. Not just a successful ranch, but a legacy of love and hard work, a foundation that would support future generations. This was what that storm-drenched afternoon had led to, when a stubborn woman and a helpful stranger had come together to fix a roof and had ended up fixing each other's lonely hearts. The seasons continued their eternal cycle, and the years rolled on like a steadily flowing river. In 1903, Gabriel and Sarah welcomed their second child, a daughter named Eleanor, and the older Eleanor wept with joy when she learned her granddaughter would carry her name. Emma met a young banker from Cedar City and married him in a lovely ceremony in 1904, moving away but visiting often. Samuel eventually returned from his wanderings in 1905, weathered and worldly, ready to settle down on a piece of land his parents helped him buy near the western edge of their property. By 1910, Eleanor and Garrett were grandparents 5 times over, with more grandchildren on the way. They had officially signed the ranch over to Gabriel, though they still lived in the main house and were consulted on all major decisions. They were in their mid-50s now, both still active and healthy, but moving a bit slower, content to let the younger generation take over the heavy work. They took walks together in the evenings now instead of working late, strolling hand in hand through the land they had tamed together. They talked about everything and nothing, about their grandchildren and their children, about memories of their early years together, about the future that stretched ahead of them. "I want to grow old with you," Eleanor said one evening as they paused on a hilltop overlooking the valley. "I want to sit on our porch when we are 70 and 80, watching our great-grandchildren play in the yard. I want decades more of this, of us." "You will have it," Garrett promised. "I am not going anywhere. We have too many sunsets left to watch together, too many grandchildren left to spoil. Besides, I still have not figured out how to say no to you, and I figure I need at least another 30 or 40 years to work on that." Eleanor laughed, the sound carrying on the evening breeze. They stood together as the light faded, 2 people who had found each other in a storm and had built something beautiful from that chance encounter. They had created a home, a family, a legacy that would outlast them both. They had loved each other through good times and bad, through loss and joy, through the ordinary moments that made up a life. And they were not done yet. There were more years ahead, more sunsets to watch, more moments to cherish. The roof they had repaired together all those years ago had long since been replaced, but the bond they had formed that day remained as strong as ever, a shelter against any storm life might bring. As they walked back to the house together, Eleanor looked up at Garrett and saw the same man she had fallen in love with over 30 years ago, aged but not diminished, weathered but not worn. He was still her partner, her love, her home. "Thank you," she said softly. "For what?" Garrett asked. "For climbing up on that roof," Eleanor said. "For not riding past that day. For choosing me, choosing us, choosing this life." Garrett stopped walking and turned to face her, his hands cradling her face with the same gentleness he had shown on their wedding night. "Eleanor, I did not choose you. I recognized you. From the moment I saw you up on that roof, fighting that storm with everything you had, I knew you were meant to be mine, and I was meant to be yours. That was not a choice. It was fate. It was destiny. It was the universe putting me exactly where I needed to be." He kissed her then, soft and sweet, and Eleanor felt the same flutter in her chest she had felt when he first touched her hand all those years ago. Some things never changed, she thought. Some loves never faded. Some storms led to the most beautiful sunrises. They walked the rest of the way home together, hands intertwined, hearts full, ready for whatever tomorrow might bring. Behind them, the valley stretched out in twilight shadow, the land they had worked and loved and passed down to their children. Ahead of them, the house glowed with lamplight, warm and welcoming, filled with the echoes of all the love and laughter they had shared within its walls. This was their story, begun in a storm and continuing through sunshine and shadow, through trials and triumphs, through all the ordinary, extraordinary moments that made up a life well lived together. And it was a story that was far from over, because true love does not end. It simply deepens and grows richer with each passing year. Eleanor and Garrett Vance had found each other when both needed someone most, and they had built something lasting from that first moment of connection. They had proven that sometimes the best things in life come from unexpected encounters, from strangers who become soulmates, from simple acts of kindness that blossom into profound love. And every time the rain fell on their valley, every time thunder rolled across the Utah sky, they remembered that storm-drenched afternoon and smiled, grateful for the tempest that had brought them together and for all the days of calm and sunshine that had followed, knowing that whatever storms might come in the future, they would weather them together just as they had always done, with love and determination and an unshakable faith in each other.